3 years into trading, Ren could describe her own failure patterns with near clinical accuracy. She knew what triggered her worst trades. She had the data. She'd written about it in her journal, multiple times, in her own words. She repeated those patterns anyway. That's not a discipline problem. That's a structural problem. And the structure most traders are missing has nothing to do with their strategy. The first layer, the technical system. This is where every serious trader starts and where most trading education lives. Your technical system is your edge, your entry criteria, your exit rules, and your risk framework. These four things together define what you do in the market and under what conditions you do it. The edge comes first, and it's worth being precise about what an edge actually is, because the word gets used loosely. An edge is not a strategy. A strategy is a set of rules. An edge is a repeatable market condition where those rules produce a positive expected value over a large enough sample. You can have a strategy without an edge. A lot of traders do, especially early on. They have rules, but those rules don't actually produce statistical advantage. They just impose the feeling of structure on what is functionally random behavior. A real edge is narrow. It's specific. It says, when this market structure is present, at this time of day, in this volatility condition, this is the setup. Not when the market looks bullish. Not when the higher time frame aligns with the lower time frame, which could mean almost anything depending on who's interpreting it. When this specific thing is present. That precision is what transforms a collection of intuitions into a testable, refinable system. Entry criteria flow from the edge. Exit rules flow from honest data about how your setups actually behave, not how you want them to behave. Position sizing flows from the math of drawdown management and the psychology of staying in the game long enough for the edge to express itself. Session filters, volatility filters, news filters, all of these are part of Layer 1. This is real, necessary work. If you've built this properly, you've done more than a large portion of retail traders ever do. But here's what I want you to notice about Layer 1. It is the most comfortable layer to work on because it's external. It lives in a document. You can write it down, test it on historical data, show it to someone, iterate on it. Every refinement produces a tangible artifact, a new rule, a tighter criterion, a better filter. That tangibility creates a feedback loop of productivity. You feel like you're building something because you can see the structure taking shape. That comfort is also a trap, because the moment the system is done enough, there's a choice. You can move into the harder, less visible work of the next two layers, or you can keep refining Layer 1. Keep looking for the tweak that will finally make the whole thing perform the way you've been imagining. Tighter entry rules, new confluence factor, different exit methodology, endlessly, without the results ever meaningfully changing. I've watched traders spend 3 years in that loop, technically more sophisticated at the end of it, fundamentally no more consistent. Because consistency doesn't live in Layer 1. It passes through Layer 1, but it doesn't originate there. The second layer. A smaller group of serious traders builds the second layer. These are traders who've made a qualitative shift in how they think about the game, from how do I find better setups to how do I get better as a trader. That shift matters. It's the beginning of treating this like a professional skill rather than a luck-adjacent lottery. The second layer is the process system, the feedback loop, the mechanism that converts raw experience into compounding skill. The journal is part of it, but the journal alone is not the layer. The journal is the data collection. What makes it a system is what you do with the data. And most traders who keep journals are collecting data without processing it. They write things down. They don't build analytical frameworks around what they've written. They don't track their execution quality separately from their P&L. They don't quantify their emotional state across sessions and look for patterns in how it correlates with performance. They don't ask, am I getting measurably better at following my own rules? And if not, why not? A real process system has several components. Pre-session preparation, not just reviewing the economic calendar, but checking your own state. Where are you mentally going into this session? Are you carrying something from yesterday? Are you coming in with unfinished emotional business from a losing trade that hasn't been processed yet? These aren't soft questions, they're operational ones, because the answers affect every decision you're about to make. Trade documentation. Specific, honest, in real time where possible. Not just followed my rules / didn't follow my rules. Why did you take this trade? What was the internal state when you pulled the trigger? What were you telling yourself? Was this a full conviction trade or a 50% conviction trade you dressed up as full? That difference matters, and most traders never record it. The weekly review. Structured, systematic, looking at performance across multiple dimensions. Not just P&L, not just win rate, execution quality, rule adherence, the relationship between your emotional state pre-session and your performance that session, your performance by day of week, by setup type, by whether you'd had a loss the previous day. Patterns that don't show up in a month of raw results start showing up clearly when you're looking at the data this way. Monthly edge validation, separate from performance review. Is your edge still behaving the way it should? Are the market conditions you trade still present? And are your rules still calibrated to those conditions? Edges can decay. Markets change. Your process system should catch this before your P&L does. Traders with a functioning Layer 2 improve faster than traders who only have Layer 1, meaningfully faster. They stop making the same mistakes indefinitely because they can see the patterns. They catch things they would have missed. They build a feedback loop that earns them genuine improvement over time instead of just accumulating screen hours. But there is a ceiling, and it is specific. And when you hit it, you often don't know what you've hit, which is what makes it so disorienting. Ren hit it at around year 3. She had a complete functional process system by that point. She was reviewing weekly with real rigor. She had identified her key failure patterns, the post-loss tightening, the defensive crouch, the shift from execution mindset to recovery mindset after consecutive losses. She had this data. She had described it to herself, in her own words, multiple times with increasing precision. And she repeated the patterns anyway. Not every time, not even most of the time, but with enough consistency that she had an uncomfortable question she couldn't answer. If I know what I'm doing wrong, and I can see it happening, why can't I stop it? That question has an answer, but the answer isn't in Layer 1 or Layer 2. The answer is that identification and execution don't happen in the same place. She was identifying patterns with her analytical, reflective mind, the part that shows up on Sunday evenings with a journal and good intentions. But the decisions were being made by a different part, a faster part, a part that operated underneath the journal, underneath the weekly review, underneath all the carefully constructed rules and frameworks, a part that had never been given a structure. The crack. There was a Wednesday, and I want you to picture this scene specifically because it's important, where Ren sat down before her session with her journal open to the previous week's review. She had written, Thursday was the breaking point again. 2 losses before noon. By the time the afternoon session opened, I was already in recovery mode. I took a trade that was maybe 60% there. It worked, which made it worse. Then I took another one Friday morning that wasn't there at all. I knew it wasn't there when I took it. I can see myself knowing it in the notes I made at the time. This is the same pattern, third time in 6 weeks. I need to find a way to break this loop. She read that. She closed the journal. She made coffee. She sat down at her charts. By 11:30 that morning, she had taken a trade that wasn't in her criteria. Not because she'd forgotten the criteria, because something had run a quiet calculation. 2 losses in the past 3 days, behind on the week, a setup forming that was close enough to justify, a pull toward the market that felt like analysis, but was actually urgency. And that calculation had produced a decision before her reflective mind had fully engaged. The setup lost. She wrote about it that evening in language so precise and self-aware, it's almost painful to read. She described the exact moment she knew the trade wasn't clean. She described what she told herself to justify it. She described the feeling afterward, not just the financial loss, but the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from watching yourself do something you already know you're going to regret. Then she closed the journal, opened her charts, and started reviewing tomorrow's setup list. This is the crack. This is the exact place where layers 1 and 2, no matter how well constructed, cannot hold without something underneath them. Because the journal is written by one version of Ren, the trade is taken by a different version. And those 2 versions had never been introduced to each other. They were operating in complete separation, and her capital was the thing caught between them. This kind of experience, recognizing a pattern, watching yourself repeat it anyway, feeling the gap between who you know you should be and who's actually running the account. This is one of the most demoralizing things in trading. Not because the losses are always large, because the gap feels permanent, like a character flaw you can see but can't change. It isn't a character flaw. It's a structural problem. And structural problems have structural solutions. If you've been sitting with that gap, and you know what I'm describing, the work being done on this channel might be the most useful thing in your trading education right now. Mind Over Markets is built entirely around this layer. Subscribe so you're there when the next piece lands. The third layer. Here's where I want to be precise, because this layer gets described vaguely, and vague descriptions make it feel optional, like a nice-to-have for the psychologically curious, rather than a mandatory structural component. The third layer is not your mindset. It is not your morning routine, or your meditation practice, or your breathing exercises before the session, although those things might serve as tools within it. It is not controlling your emotions, which is both misguided as a goal and impossible as a practice. You cannot control emotions. You can build architecture around how they influence decisions. Those are completely different things. The third layer is the identity system. And the identity system has a specific definition. It is the answer to this question. Who are you as a trader when things stop going according to plan? Not who you intend to be. Not who you are on your best day in a simulator explaining your methodology to someone else when it sounds clean and coherent. Who are you when you've had 4 consecutive losses, you're 3% down on the week, there's a setup forming that's close to your criteria but not quite there, and somewhere underneath the analysis, a voice is saying, you need to get this back before the week closes. Who is making the decision in that moment? That question, asked honestly, is the entry point to the third layer. And for most traders, including traders who've been serious about this for years, the honest answer is uncomfortable. Because the person making the decision in that moment is not the trader they've been building in their head. It's an older version. a version running on beliefs they've never examined. Beliefs about what a losing streak means, about what consecutive losses say about their competence, their potential, their fundamental capacity for this. This is the operating system. Think about that metaphor seriously. Your technical system is software. Your process system is software. They're programs. They have rules. They take inputs. They produce outputs. They're sophisticated. They're well written. They're the result of real work. But they run on an operating system. And if the operating system is corrupted, if it's running on the belief that losing means failing, that failing means you're not cut out for this, that being down on the weak is evidence of something about your worth rather than just the natural variance of a probabilistic game, then the software fails. Not because the software is bad, because the OS is overriding it every time. And the trade that Ren took, the one she wrote about with that exhausted, self-aware precision, that wasn't a failure of discipline. It wasn't a failure of her process. The journal worked exactly as designed. It identified the pattern. The process worked exactly as designed. It gave her the data. The operating system failed. The version of Ren that took that trade believed, somewhere underneath the journal entries and the weekly reviews and the carefully constructed rules, that being down on the week meant something that needed to be fixed urgently. And that belief, never named, never examined, never given a structure, ran faster than everything built on top of it. What does a loss mean to you? Not philosophically, not in the abstract. In the 3 seconds after a trade closes red, in the moment before the next thought forms, what happens? If you feel urgency, a need to respond, to fix it, to be back in the market, that feeling has a source. The source is a belief. The belief is usually something along the lines of, this loss means something about me, and I need to counteract that meaning by winning. That belief is not true. It is not even a coherent position. A loss is a loss. It is one data point in a probabilistic sequence. It contains no information about your value as a person, or even, in isolation, about the quality of your execution. But the operating system doesn't care about that. The operating system is older than your trading career. It runs on patterns formed long before you ever opened a chart. And it will keep running those patterns until you build something around them that's strong enough to hold. The identity system is that structure. Here is what it actually consists of. First, a precise map of your failure modes built from your actual data, not generic psychological tendencies, your specific ones. The exact emotional conditions that precede your worst trades. Not, I trade badly when I'm upset. That's useless. My execution quality drops measurably after 2 consecutive losses within a single session, particularly in the afternoon. And the primary behavior change is a reduction in setup quality from full criteria to approximately 60% criteria, accompanied by an increase in position frequency. That's a data point. That's usable. And if you have a functional layer too, that data already exists in your journal. You just haven't translated it into an engineering specification yet. Second, identification of your primary trigger. Everyone has one or two. The most common ones among serious active traders are the urgency to recover losses, the fear of missing a move, the compulsion to be right rather than simply profitable, the inability to sit in a trade while it temporarily moves against you, and the recklessness that appears counterintuitively after a period of strong performance. Each of these triggers has a specific signature, a specific pattern of physiological and cognitive signals that precedes the decision. The work is learning to recognize the signature before it becomes a decision. Third, a specific, practiced protocol for each trigger. not a vague intention, not "I will be more patient next time." A literal sequence of steps. When I feel trigger X, I do Y. Y might be stepping away from the screen for a defined period. Y might be writing a specific sentence that interrupts the loop. Y might be a 5-question checklist that forces re-engagement with your criteria. Whatever Y is, it needs to be defined, written down, and practiced before you need it, not improvised in the moment when the emotional system is already running. You don't design fire procedures while the building is burning. Fourth, and this is the deepest work, the deliberate, sustained practice of separating your identity from your results. This is not a philosophical exercise. It has direct operational consequences. If your self-concept as a trader and as a person is entangled with your P&L, then every trade carries a weight it was never designed to carry. Every loss is a small verdict. Every drawdown is accumulating evidence of something you don't want to believe but can't quite stop believing. That entanglement is what drives Ren's pattern. That's what drives Marcus's sizing explosions after losing streaks. It's what drives Eli into the market 3 times in a row when one clean trade was all the setup offered. Not stupidity, not laziness. The weight of identity attached to results, making every decision about something more than the trade. Untangling that is not a single event. It's a practice. It happens through repetition. Catching the moment the old belief activates and choosing, deliberately, to respond differently. Not suppressing the feeling, not pretending the fear isn't there, but building a structure strong enough to hold the feeling without letting it drive the car. I want to be direct about what this work actually looks like day to day, because do the psychological work is the most useless possible advice. Start with the data you already have. If you have a journal that's been running for more than 3 months, you have the raw material for your failure mode map. Go back through your worst sessions. Not your most losing sessions, your worst sessions by execution quality. The ones where you knew you were off script. What do they have in common? Time of day. Day of week. What happened before them? Your emotional state going in. Your account balance context. How many consecutive losses had preceded them? You are looking for the conditions that produce your worst version, and you will find them. They are there. They repeat. They are more patterned than you think, which is both unsettling and useful. Once you have the map, you design the protocols. The key distinction here: a protocol is a pre-committed decision. It's a rule made by your calm self in advance for your activated self in the moment. Your activated self, the one sitting at the charts with 2 losses in a row and a voice saying you need to make this back, is not equipped to design solutions in real time. Your calm self has to do that work in advance and leave the instructions in a place your activated self will find them. Ren, eventually, put a note on her monitor. Not a motivational quote, a question. Is this execution or urgency? 3 words that interrupted the loop, that created just enough friction between the impulse and the action for her reflective mind to come back online. It sounds small. It was not small. It was the difference between the person she'd been and the person she became. Eli's version was different. He found that when he was about to overtrade, he was physically doing something specific, leaning forward, breathing shallower, mouse already positioned over the buy button before the setup had fully formed. He started using the physical signal as the interrupt. The moment he noticed the posture, he pushed back from the desk, stood up, made tea, read his rules, came back in 2 minutes. Usually, the urgency had dissolved. The setup was either still there or it wasn't. Either way, he was choosing rather than reacting. These are not profound psychological breakthroughs. They are engineered responses to specific, identified failure conditions. They are the third layer of a trading system built with the same rigor you'd apply to a technical entry criterion. They are just as important, probably more important, because they're what allows the other two layers to function as designed. The deeper work, separating self-worth from results, unfolds more slowly. It's not something that happens from deciding it should be different. It happens from repeated, deliberate practice of responding differently to losses. Taking a loss, noting it, moving on. No story, no verdict, no 5 minutes of self-criticism that poisons the next decision. Just, that trade lost, the edge is still valid, the next trade is unconnected to this one. Every time you do that cleanly, you are slightly rewriting the operating system. Not dramatically, not visibly. The rewrite happens in small increments, compounding over time, the same way interest compounds. And at some point, not a specific moment, but over a period of weeks and months, you notice that the losses don't carry the same charge they used to, that a bad week doesn't send you into the spiral it used to, that you can sit with drawdown without it activating the version of yourself that makes everything worse. That change is real, it is earned, and it cannot be shortcut. Layer 1, 2, and 3 don't operate in sequence, they operate simultaneously. They are not stages you pass through, they are concurrent structures that support each other constantly. At every moment you're at the charts, your technical system is telling you whether your edge is present. Your process system is running in the background, recording, building the data set you'll use to improve. And your identity system is determining who is actually executing. That last function is the one that either makes the whole thing work or quietly dismantles it. And it is always running. The only question is whether it's running by design or by default. Think of the building again. The technical system is the architectural plan. It says what the building is and how the spaces function. The process system is the quality control mechanism, the inspection process that catches problems and informs the next version. The identity system is the foundation, underground, invisible once the building is up, but carrying the load of everything built on top of it. You can have the most sophisticated architectural plan ever drawn. You can have the most rigorous quality control process in the industry. If the foundation is cracked, if the thing underneath everything is running on fear, on the need to recover quickly, on the desperate need to not be someone who fails at this, the building will fail. Not always visibly, not always dramatically, but under pressure, with enough accumulated stress, it will fail. And here is the frustrating thing. When it fails, it will look like a strategy problem, because the trade that broke the rules looks like an entry problem. The position that was too large looks like a risk management problem. The session that went off the rails looks like an execution problem. All of those things are true at the surface level, but the root is in the foundation. Fix the strategy, fix the risk rules, fix the execution checklist, and the cycle repeats. Because you fixed the walls without touching what the walls are standing on, the complete system addresses all 3 layers, not in sequence, simultaneously, not as separate projects, as an integrated structure where each layer supports the others. Your edge produces your results when you follow it. Your process system keeps you following it and improving it. Your identity system keeps you being the trader who actually does what the first 2 layers require. Remove any one piece, and the other 2 will eventually be overwhelmed by whatever that missing piece was supposed to hold. Why the third layer stays unbuilt. I don't think traders leave the third layer unbuilt out of laziness. The traders I've known who are stuck in this pattern are some of the most committed, most hard-working people I've encountered in any field. They work harder at this than most people work at anything. The third layer stays unbuilt for a specific reason that has nothing to do with effort. Building layer 1 requires you to examine the market. Building layer 2 requires you to examine your behavior. Building layer 3 requires you to examine yourself. And examining yourself, genuinely, without the buffer of analytical distance, is threatening in a way that examining the market or your behavior never is. When you're refining your entry criteria, the thing under examination is external. When you're reviewing your trade journal, the thing under examination is your actions, one step removed from you. You can look at your actions with analytical detachment. You can say, I did this. This was suboptimal. I will do differently, without it touching the thing at the core of you. When you're building the third layer, the thing under examination is the core of you. What you believe about failure. What you believe about your own capacity. What you believe a loss means, not intellectually, but viscerally, in the moment before rational thought reasserts itself. What story you're telling yourself about what this all means and whether you're going to make it. That examination is uncomfortable in a way that has no equivalent in technical analysis, and the ego, reliably, produces alternatives. It finds another strategy to test. It suggests a new confluence factor. It recommends a different approach to exits. It offers you infinite productive feeling alternatives to the one thing it doesn't want you to look at. Most traders follow those alternatives indefinitely. Not because they're weak, because the alternatives feel like trading work and the third layer doesn't. It feels like something else. Something adjacent to therapy, something that belongs in a different context, something that serious traders shouldn't need to do. That belief is exactly the last trick the ego plays, because the third layer is the most serious trading work there is. Everything else you build runs on it. What changes when it's built? Ren is still trading. She's been through another 18 months since the period I was describing, and she talks about it differently now. Not better strategy, not better process, better structure underneath everything. The losses still happen. Of course they do. Losses are part of every real edge. But they don't mean anything now that they used to mean. They're just trades, data points in a sequence. She doesn't need them to mean something about her, so they don't. She told me once that the strangest part of building the third layer was realizing how much cognitive energy she'd been spending on managing the weight of what losing meant, energy that was unavailable for actual trading. When the weight came off, there was a clarity in the seat that hadn't been there before. Not confidence in the outcome, confidence in the process, which is the only kind that holds up. That's not a personality transformation. She didn't become a different person. She became a trader who had actually finished building the system, all three layers, for the first time. The entry criteria were the same. The risk rules were the same. The journal was the same. The market was the same. The only thing that changed was what was running underneath all of it. That's the missing layer, and it has been missing the whole time. A complete trading system tells you what to do in the market. It tells you how to get better at doing it, and it tells you who you need to be to actually do what the first two parts require, especially when conditions are hardest and the temptation to override everything is loudest. 3 layers, all of them required, none of them optional. The market will never care how good your system is on paper. It only ever meets the trader sitting down to execute it. Build that trader as deliberately as you built everything else.